It's a special crossover edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast on Tuesday as John Chik of Locked On New York Rangers joins the show to discuss what he's looking for in Mike Sullivan as the New York Rangers head coach. Plus, will the Rangers keep the 12th overall pick or will they send the Penguins that pick for this year? That's all coming up right after this.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, so let's go ahead and kick off this special crossover edition here today. This is John Chik with Locked On New York Rangers, joined by my very good friends Hunter Hodes and Patrick Damp of Locked On Pittsburgh Penguins. And fellas, first of all, thanks for doing this. Obviously a whirlwind couple of days for both of our franchises. Mike Sullivan leaving the Penguins and joining the Rangers just a couple of days later. And one of my first questions for both of you is how much of a shock was this? Because there's certain Penguin fans that feel like it was very surprising, and then there's others who kind of feel like the writing was kind of on the wall. So just your initial reaction to it, and how much of a surprise was this?
Yeah, the writing was definitely on the wall, but I didn't feel like it was going to happen this summer. It felt like just his seat was still kind of cold to me. I mean, I had been on the train of it's probably time to let Mike Sullivan go for the last year and a half. And it wasn't because like he lost the locker room or anything, John. It was just because the level of play had dipped. They weren't a playoff team anymore. It was kind of like, okay, let's kind of turn the page a little bit here. I don't think every single Penguins problem was his fault, but they were blowing too many leads. They weren't playing well in their own zone. It was just a multitude of issues. Like, sir, there were a little bit of problems with some younger players, not all, but some maybe didn't get the chances that they should have. But you did see at the end of the season, he gave Rutger McGroarty and Ville Koivunen a nice long leash in the top six, and they cooked as expected. I mean, these are two of the best Penguins prospects that have come up in the pipeline in a long time. But still, before that, there were a couple of instances where he wouldn't give a couple of these younger pieces long enough of a leash, while some veterans would stay in the lineup that were keep making boneheaded mistakes. Again, that was something a little bit different though. But the way that Mike Sullivan was talking after the season, the first press conference that Kyle Dubas even had, like it felt like they were kind of on the same page. They're going to keep working together. Mike Sullivan is going to stay the head coach. But then all of a sudden, a week later, Kyle Dubas was like, yeah, this is something that I have been thinking about for quite some time. He even said he was thinking about it during the season, and he felt like this was the right time to do it. John, they said this was a mutual parting of ways. He got fired. That's what this was. Yeah. He got fired by the Penguins. And Kyle Dubas wanted to turn this over to a new head coach that can oversee this transition phase because this team is rebuilding on the fly. They're probably not going to make the playoffs this year. And he wants a coach that can come in here and really help develop, some of these younger pieces. Again, like a Rutger McGroarty, like a Ville Koivunen, Tristan Brose, Sergei Murashov down there, Yoel Blomqvist, Harrison Brunick, whoever they take with the 11th overall pick. That's what it looks like they're going towards. And that's why I don't think you're going to see them hire a retread coach or anything like that. I think it's going to be a young coach. Again, we'll talk about it later, like a Mitch Love, like a Todd Nelson, someone like that. And that can really help develop some of these younger pieces. But yeah, man, I was still a bit surprised. I didn't see it coming just because of the way Sullivan was talking after the season. Like that's really my main thoughts on it.
The listeners of Locked On Penguins will know from just being our subscribers is of our show, Hunter was the guy who wanted to kick Sullivan out the door. And I don't say that with any negativity, but Hunter said everything he had to say there, and I've disagreed but understood his points. I was kind of more of the mindset of you've got a great coach here. A lot of the issues that surrounded the Penguins the last few years, you really couldn't point back to coaching. Some things here and there, yeah, you'd like to see them change, but on the whole, you look at what had been going on with the franchise the last four-ish years, coaching was maybe on page 2 or 3 of what their problems were. It wasn't on Sullivan. But the shock for me was that it just happened so swiftly because like Hunter said, season ends, they do their locker clean out, they have their first media availability, and it looks like Dubas and Sullivan are working hand in glove. It looks like this is a productive relationship. It's two guys who they may have some disagreements on the margin, but they understand where this this franchise needs to go. And then on a Monday morning, out of the clear blue sky, they drop the news that they have parted ways with Mike Sullivan. And then the shock really was the press conference by Kyle Dubas later that day, where the Penguins put out this news release, these social media posts saying, oh, the Penguins and Mike Sullivan have mutually agreed to part ways. Then you listen to Dubas's press conference, and Dubas pretty much comes out and says he fired him. And the thing I want to make sure is clear for the listeners of Locked On Rangers is I don't think there was any sort of knockdown, drag out fight between the two. They didn't suddenly have a falling out. I think, and most reporting confirms this, they just weren't on the same timelines anymore. Kyle Dubas understands this is going to take quite a few years. They're going to have to be patient. They're going to have to be very savvy on the trade market. They're going to have to hit on a lot of draft picks. Mike Sullivan, ultimate competitor. He wants to win. He wants to win now. And when you have Crosby still playing at a 90-point pace, and you've got some young guys who look like they are more than ready to be NHL contributors, he probably wants him to speed this up. But that happens. And realistically, while I'm disappointed to lose such a good coach from the organization, you can absolutely see that it is probably time to turn the page, to let him go to, now we know, a team like the Rangers, who are way more closer to contention than the Penguins are.
Yeah, that's actually something that I wanted to ask you about, Patrick. We mentioned this really quickly right before we hit record there, but we were talking about some of the parallels between this current Ranger team and also the Penguins team when Sullivan first took over. And of course, he takes over midseason, they win a Stanley Cup, and then the next season they win the Cup again. And it's interesting because the Rangers, just like the Penguins back then, some veterans on the team, also some promising young players, coming along and developing. And he's able to turn everything around at just a complete 180. And the Rangers, for better or worse, they're not going full on tear down rebuild. They're trying to retool this thing on the fly. So that's a reason that I got excited about bringing in Mike Sullivan. But what are your thoughts on that? Like, do you see those similarities too between this Ranger team and those Penguin teams from way back when?
Absolutely. It's obviously not a 1-to-1. No disrespect to you and Rangers fans out there. You don't have a Crosby, you don't have a Malkin, but you look at the at least narrative parallels, right? The Penguins at the time had a solid veteran core who had been underachieving. They had not been playing well. They've been not playing up to the standard they needed to. They were extremely disappointing in the postseason. And then they bring in Sullivan, and he's able to get the most out of these guys. They go on an unbelievable 2-year run where, like you said, they win the Stanley Cup in 16. They repeat in 17. And the biggest thing that I said to you, John, before we hit record was when I look at the Rangers, I look at it this way. He's the right kind of coach for this moment for them, because you can see with the last two coaches that the Rangers have had. One gets accused of being a little too player friendly, little too letting these guys kind of do whatever they want. Then you overcorrect. You get Peter Laviolette, who by all accounts is pretty much an authoritarian coach who is going to crack the whip at all times. You bring in Mike Sullivan, and he's a blend of both. He's not going to be the best friend for all the players, but he's going to give them the respect that they earn. He's going to give them leashes that they earn. But you know that he is the guy in charge. The story I always point to, when he took over in 15 and 16, there was a story where he brought in Malkin, Letang, and Crosby and said, because at the time, the Penguins' power play up to that point had been terrible. And he brings them in and says, you've got 5 games to prove to me you belong on the same power play unit, or I'm breaking you up. They didn't light the world on fire in those 5 games, but they played a lot better. So the message was out right then. He said, hey, I'm not going to take the sticks out of my best players' hands, but we're going to have to work. We're going to have to earn everything we get. And he just commands that kind of respect from players to where they know he's in charge. He will take their input, but he's not going to drive them into the ground. He's not going to punish them for every little mistake. But when they're not playing to a certain level, you know he's the guy in charge.
Ryan, just to go off of Pat's point there, the big three had the utmost respect for Mike Sullivan, Chris Letang, Sidney Crosby. They both said like they never wanted to play for another coach again. Obviously, they're not going to get their wish now because they will have a new coach for next season. But that's just how much they respected Sullivan throughout his tenure here. Evgeny Malkin, you saw him, Pat, giving Sully hugs throughout the season every time there was a big accomplishment in the locker room. Those three had such a great relationship with him. And I think you're going to see some of the Ranger star players potentially have those types of relationships as well. And the thing with the Rangers is I think Sullivan can get the Rangers back to the playoffs if everything goes right. He's also going to have the best goaltender as a coach that he's had since prime Matt Murray in 2016 and 2017 and Igor Shesterkin. My biggest thing is with the Rangers and him, can he get this team back to being a contender? And can he potentially have them beat some of the better teams in the playoffs? Like the Rangers, they've been able to beat some of these teams where they have the advantage in high-end talent. But when they go up against some of the big dogs like Florida, who has a Sasha Barkov, they have a Sam Reinhart, etc., Matthew Tkachuk, and then you go up against a Tampa that has a Kucherov, and they had Stamkos at the time, of course, and Vasilevsky. They weren't able to beat some of those big dogs. I'm curious to see if he can get the Rangers to that point and give his top players an opportunity to do that. But again, it's potentially going to be a bit tougher now because some of the Rangers' top players are a bit older. There's contract situations, all that good stuff. So it's a really interesting situation here.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I have to ask you guys about tactically with Mike Sullivan is something that I understand was a big-time staple of his teams in Pittsburgh, and specifically the championship seasons, the forecheck. The forecheck was extremely aggressive. Guys were getting in there, going to work. And that was something that was a serious issue for the Rangers this year. I mean, the forecheck specifically, but just effort in general was a big-time problem night to night for this team. So, I mean, is he that guy? From what I'm gathering, he's that guy that will demand that out of his players, demand that kind of effort, to demand that kind of intensity, demand that you forecheck and backcheck at least once in a while. Am I correct there?
Yes, I would say so. I mean, the NHL is a copycat league. Everyone knows that. The way the Penguins forechecked in 16 and 17, every team tried to imitate it. Like, wow, look at the way the Penguins are playing here. Look at the speed that they have. And since then, you've seen some of the top teams that are still in the league right now, John. They've taken that, imitated it, and they've done it to their best of their ability. And the league has just really taken off, honestly, since then. Like, that was a big staple of those Penguins teams, how fast they were, how aggressively they forechecked. But he also knows how to shut it down. Like the Penguins 1-2-2 neutral zone trap in 16 and 17 frustrated all of their playoff opponents. They knew how to suffocate when they had the lead in the third period. Haven't done that as much these last few years because the personnel is different and all that other stuff. But when this Penguins team was in their prime in those two Grey Cup years, the way they were able to suffocate teams and not allow anything in the defensive zone, that was a pretty big hallmark of the system too. So I think we'll have to see if he can get the Rangers to do that, since obviously the defenseman, it's a bit of a different situation, but that's something you can also look for as well, especially when you watch the Rangers with a lead in the third period.
It's a smothering system. I think if I had to tweak a little bit of what Hunter just said, I would, instead of use the word suffocate, I would use smother. I know it's kind of the same, but the thing that was the hallmark of Sullivan's system when this team was really clicking, they swarmed you in all three zones. To call what they did in the neutral zone a trap is a bit of a misnomer, because you think 90s Devils, right? It's a slog. You can't get through it. No, the thing was, they pressured you in all three zones. They pressured you to the point where you'd make mistakes with the puck, or at the very least in the neutral zone, there would be enough pressure that the only option was just to dump it deep. And then the Penguins had the kind of speed where, okay, you dumped it deep, that's just a change of possession. So we take the puck and we go the other way and kill you on the transition. So if he can get that out of the Rangers to where they play a smothering style in all three zones, and then you have the ultimate security blanket with your goaltender, with Shesterkin, that could work really well for this team. They're just going to have to find out if they have the personnel to run that kind of system.
Gotcha. So we're going to keep everything rolling in just a second. I got a couple other questions for you guys about Sullivan and specifically him with the young players. Can he develop some young players, which I know he's done in the past, maybe not quite as much recently, but we'll get to that. Definitely want to ask you guys about the Penguins search for a new head coach as well and get your take on that. So we'll do all that fun stuff in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers and Locked On Pittsburgh Penguins is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that is both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. The satisfying crunch of opening each shell, it is like snack meditation. Whether you're running between meetings or dropping off the kids, Wonderful Pistachios are the snack that works just as hard as you do. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, so we'll keep everything rolling on this very special crossover edition of Locked On Rangers and Locked On Penguins here. And another question that I know a lot of Ranger fans are heavily invested in, and we'd love to get your guys' take on this, is young players. Can Sullivan develop young players? Does he prioritize developing young players? You know, you look at those Stanley Cup teams that you guys had, and there were some young players that made some big-time contributions. Gensel and Rust, I think maybe the two best examples. Even somebody like Brian Dumoulin was very young back then. Just your thoughts on Sullivan's ability to do this, and is he as good at it now as he was, back then?
Yeah, the thing is, I'm going to put a marker down here, and I'm just going to say yes. I know that a lot of our listeners are probably shouting at their radios right now or throwing empty beer cans at their TV, but if you've listened to our show, the thing that I keep beating the drum of is since those cup runs, the Penguins have had what I refer to as quad A players, guys who are too good for the AHL, but not good enough for the NHL. They're not going to do a whole lot when they go back down to the American League, but they're not ready to be NHL contributors, or they just aren't NHL contributors. But because we're fans, you see a 19, 20, 21-year-old player and you think, this guy's a blank canvas. He's the next one. Just got to give him a shot. You just got to give him a shot. Penguins haven't really had anybody like that. Like Hunter alluded to in the first segment, the end of the season, Rutger McGroarty and Ville Koivunen come up. He puts them in the top 6 and they thrive because he finally had young talent that he could actually use. Last few years, everybody has talked themselves into these prospects who, yeah, they might be bottom 6 contributors or bottom pairing defensemen. And we all kind of tell ourselves, oh, you just got to give him a chance. They just weren't that. And you give him younger players, which you look at the Rangers right now, they have a handful of younger players who could contribute at the NHL level. He'll give them the opportunity. The next step in this is those guys have to take the ball and run with it. The last few years with the Penguins, a lot of those younger guys that they gave opportunities to, they wouldn't be a liability. They weren't bad, but they didn't really do anything to earn more ice time. So if you give him the right players who can grow into contributors, he will put them in a position to succeed.
Yeah, and just to go off Pat's point a little bit there, obviously, John, I know you guys have Gabe Perreault, and that was a pretty big storyline to end the season where Peter Laviolette was kind of saying like, yeah, this is part of the development process. We're going to scratch him, even though that makes no sense. Mike Sullivan, I think, will play someone like that. One of your top prospects. He was on my Penguins-specific big board during that draft. I felt like he would have been a good pick at the time. But considering how that situation went, considering the talent that he has, I think Mike Sullivan will throw him to the Wolves a little bit, play him in a top 9 role, and kind of see if he sinks or swims. That's the type of prospect that's exactly what he did with McGroarty and Koivunen. Threw them into the top 6, saying like, hey, go sink or swim. We're going to put you guys with our big guns. Let's see how you do. And they showed that they were NHL ready heading into next season. They also played on the top power play to end the season as well. I think you're going to see something similar with Gabe Perreault because he is a legitimate prospect who is probably NHL ready, but did not really get to showcase that here down the stretch. And then they burned a year of his ELC for reasons that I still don't even understand, John. So someone like that, I think, could really benefit from Mike Sullivan as a younger player.
Yeah, that's a whole storyline in and of itself. Peter Laviolette and what he did with Gabe Perreault at the end of last season. I mean, it's like I guess the idea was he's still clinging to this idea of that they could still get into the playoffs, but I don't know, man. When you're throwing like Juuso Parssinen out there instead of your number 1 overall, or not overall pick, but your first round pick, your homegrown prospect, I mean, it's just like, what are we doing here? We've just completely lost the plot, and it is what it is. But it is nice to hear that Sullivan will give these guys at least a chance. Nothing is free. Everything's got to be earned and all that good stuff. But it's good to hear that he won't just automatically defer to the veterans, because I think that's something that we see from so many coaches around this league. But speaking of the veterans, I wanted to ask both of you about this. A couple of Ranger veterans. I mean, honestly, pretty much the entire team is coming off of a down season. But if we really want to focus in on like those high-paid, supposed superstar players that the Rangers have, guys like Mika Zibanejad, guys like Chris Kreider, guys like Vincent Trocheck, all of them took a step back this past season. And Kreider, we're not even sure if he's coming back. But if those guys are all there, if they're all in the fold, I mean, does Sullivan have any kind of a track record of kind of like reinvigorating veterans, whether they're guys that have been on the Penguins for a while or like veteran free agents that came in? Kevin Hayes maybe is an example of that. But can he do that? Can he get the most out of guys that have kind of, I don't know what the word is, maybe like plateaued or even kind of regressed as they've gotten older, and kind of reinvigorate them a little bit?
I think it depends, right? Obviously, you look at the situation when he came into the Penguins a decade ago. It wasn't that Crosby and Malkin and those guys had taken a step back per se. They were still playing fairly well. The problem was, at least at the time, and I think this is actually going to fold in to make it a yes for Mike Sullivan, is when the Penguins were in their malaise at the end of Dan Bylsma and through the experiment that was Mike Johnston, they just got a little too comfortable. Dan Bylsma, it's an old Penguins. I don't even know you can say meme, because I don't think meme was a word yet in the late 90s, early 2000s, where Dan Bylsma kind of at the end brought back the Penguins country club. There was not a lot of accountability. He was letting guys get away with things. He was a little too player friendly. And then Mike Johnston was just the wrong coach. He was defense first. And you look at that roster needed to be all gas, no breaks, forget about defense, let these guys run. But I do think with Sullivan, an underrated part of his coaching ability is he puts players in a position to succeed. He's not going to ask, to quote our good friend and frequent guest of our show, Jesse Marshall, he's not going to ask a cat to bark and then get mad when the cat can't bark. So he's not going to put these guys in positions that they're unfamiliar with. He may use them in situations you're not a big fan of, but he's not going to continually try that. If he sees that Zibanejad's not working in a certain role, he'll move him around. If Kreider comes back, he won't try to make him turn into, a defensive Selke candidate. He's going to let him go run. So like I said, an underrated part of him is he knows where to put certain talent. So if these guys had down years under a coach that you could kind of tell they had checked out from, that could spell good news for the Rangers.
Yeah, I do think all of that is fair. I guess the biggest thing is, they are another year older. So can they get back to the level that we've seen them play at during their times as Rangers? Not this past year, but last year, Vince Trocheck has a career year. It was a Zibanejad a few years ago, has a career year. Panarin has continued to be really good throughout his Rangers tenure. But it's funny, that contract is getting close to being almost up, which is crazy to say because it feels like that contract was just signed literally yesterday. So I guess I'm a bit curious to see if he can get them back to their previous levels, even though they're kind of out of their prime or so-called peak years in the NHL. My biggest curiosity is what they're going to do with their roster construction this offseason. That's the biggest thing. What are him and Chris Drury going to really look for? Because you look at their defense, a lot of those guys are signed not just for this upcoming season, but for the next seasons. A lot of the forward group is filled out. I think they're going to have to get a bit creative if they really want to add a true other difference maker to really kick this thing into high gear and really potentially even be a contender next season. Again, that's just me though.
Yeah, I mean, any of that is possible. The thing that makes it difficult, though, is they just don't have a ton of cap space to work with. And that's part of the reason why I do think there's a decent chance that you see Chris Kreider get traded this offseason, among other reasons. I do think that maybe Sullivan being the coach maybe increases the chances that he stays, because the two of them do have a history together, and they were together recently at the Four Nations. So maybe Sullivan goes to bat for him, and he says, this is my guy. I want him here. And maybe that works in Kreider's favor, but we'll see what happens there. I do definitely want to ask you guys about the Penguins search for a head coach, because I'm kind of out of the loop. I don't know if there's somebody that's a favorite. I don't know, who you guys would prefer. So definitely curious to find out about that, and we'll do all that in just a second. All right, so keeping everything rolling here on this very special crossover edition of Locked On Rangers and Locked On Penguins. And fellas, we talked about Sullivan for quite a bit here. And again, thank you so much for giving some intel on him, going into this upcoming season. But I got to ask you about your own head coaching search. It's not a situation that either of you or Penguin fans are used to being in here. So for starters, is there a certain type of coach you would like? I think earlier, I think it was Patrick that mentioned you might see somebody as a first-time NHL head coach rather than a retread. Is that kind of where you guys are at, though? Like, are you looking for somebody that, hasn't been an NHL head coach before and somebody you can kind of catch lightning in a bottle with, going forward into next season?
Yeah, that's kind of what they're looking at. I don't think it's going to be a retread like a Peter Laviolette, Gerard Gallant, anything down that road. Yes, the memes would be hilarious that John Torello took over, but that's not happening here, people. I don't even know if he's ever even going to be an NHL head coach again, just with his age and then how long he's been a coach and all that stuff. I don't think they're going to hire a retread. I think they're going to go after a younger coach who doesn't have maybe as much NHL head coaching experience. Again, someone like a Todd Nelson makes a lot of sense to me. He's been doing a great job in Hershey, Washington's AHL team. They just beat Lehigh Valley in the AHL playoffs this past weekend. He's been doing a great job there. Someone like Mitch Love, Capitals assistant head coach, of Spencer Carbury. Pat and I were kind of discussing this during our Monday episode, thinking about, are they trying to look for their next Spencer Carbury, or is it going to be a little bit different? And I feel like it might be a bit of a mix. I think maybe the dream is to get their next Spencer Carbury, but that's easier said than done because Carbury has become one of the best coaches in the league these last couple of seasons. But I think it's going to be a younger coach who maybe has never been a head coach at the NHL level before, but is ready to take on that role. Those are just two names I've thrown out there. I've heard a couple rumblings that Jessica Campbell might get an interview from Kyle Dubas of the Seattle Kraken. We'll have to see on that. But again, you're going to see a coaching pool here that it's not just a bunch of retreads. Like, I think Kyle Dubas wants someone that can really come in here and oversee the development of some of these younger pieces, while also someone that can kind of just ease the big three into their final few years of their career. This might be Evgeny Malkin's last year of his career, last year of his current contract. We'll have to see what happens. Crystal Tank still has 3 years. Crosby has 2. So they're looking for a coach that can kind of oversee both of those things at the same time as they kind of go into this period of, transition, rebuild on the fly.
Yeah, I don't really have a ton to add to that. Hunter kind of hit all the points. The one thing I do want to kind of bring up again that I said on our Monday show is, I know the narrative is that they're looking for their Spencer Carbury, but I push back on that in only a little bit of a way. Obviously, they want to find the next young, up-and-coming, who's going to be a really good coach who hasn't gotten their shot yet. But the narrative of it was, with Spencer Carbury, that was the kind of coach that the Caps needed because they knew they were ready to take a step. Right. You still have Alex Ovechkin. You've got a bunch of young homegrown players as well as some reclamation projects who you knew were going to work out. So you knew that team was ready to take a step. Penguins aren't there yet. They will be in 2 or 3 years. They'll be ready to take a step with these young players hopefully developing. You take some swings on the trade market and free agency. So I know the narrative is they want to get the next Spencer Carbury, but realistically, that's not quite who they need just yet. They should continue to look for a young coach just because it can be a completely blank slate. You can learn from 3 great players who have carved out Hall of Fame careers, and you can build positive relationships with the young players coming up to usher them into the next era of Penguins hockey. So obviously this is early on in the search. Dubas is over at the World Championships as Canada's GM. So he's really a little bit behind on this because he's focused on what Team Canada's doing right now. And then once he gets back to North America, then I think we're going to start, especially once the World Championships end, we're really going to start seeing this process get moving.
Makes sense. If it happened to be a retread coach, is there anybody that's like your front runner? I mean, we don't have to spend a ton of time on this, but I see Hunter shaking his head, and I'm kind of the same way because like of all the retreads, like Sullivan was my top pick for the Rangers, but there is that part of me, and both of you guys touched on it. They would have preferred a younger coach. And it's funny, the Rangers had their guy. He was right there. Chris Knobloch was coaching the Wolfpack for a bunch of seasons, doing a good job there. There was that situation where David Quinn got COVID, and so did the entire Ranger coaching staff. And Knobloch coached the Rangers for like 6 games. It was right there. And then went with Laviolette instead. And year one with Laviolette, you can't argue against that. It was a great season. But Knobloch now flourishing with Edmonton. So, but if there was a retread, just to throw out a name just for fun here, who would you go with?
If you want to count him as a retread, sure, whatever. I don't. Jay Woodcroft.
Okay.
I don't think he's a retread, though. So
that would be my answer. It's not quite a retread. Hunter said it on our Monday show. There was some speculation of Drew Bannister from St. Louis. Hard pass from me on that. Wasn't very good. We saw what St. Louis was able to do once they got rid of him. So if there is ever a retread, and again, like Hunter said, it's a quote unquote, it's Jay Woodcroft. But other than that, I don't think Kyle Dubas is going retread. I think he wants to go new, young, get a fresh perspective, and help this team move into another era.
Yeah, one other name that I'll throw out there, because I watched your episode after Mike Sullivan got fired, and like Hunter, I think it was you that talked about this, but like the guy that's like just such an overrated NHL head coach, at least going by his track record, is Rick Tocchet. Like the dude's made the playoffs twice in 10 years.
This dude has a great PR team,
like,
man.
Dude, let's get Tocchet, and I'm like, why? Like what?
I'm telling you, John, he has a great PR team.
Yeah.
Great friend of the show. He comes on our show all the time. Josh Yowie. He wrote a piece about Rick Tocchet, and I'm like, Josh, we don't need this, man. We don't. Rick Tocchet is very overrated. His PR team is just awesome, though. Like you see, it's talked about in 32 Thoughts all the time. Like, oh, he's high on Philly's list, but we don't know if he's going to go there. What about Boston? What about Seattle? It's like, are we really doing a bidding war for him at this rate? I don't know. It's just funny to me. I think he can succeed in the right situation, but people talking about him like he's the next Scotty Bowman. It's like, people got to chill here.
I will say, he referenced Josh's piece. I will say, if the only concern for the Penguins right now was keeping the big three happy before they retire, I'd be all for Rick Tocchet because they love him just like they loved Sullivan, but they're not thinking short term right now. They're thinking long term. So to me, that kind of spells out they like him, they respect him. He's probably going to get maybe a phone call or an interview, but I would highly doubt if he gets hired as the Penguins coach.
Yeah, that makes sense. And one more thing that we got to talk about, very unique situation coming into the NHL draft this year. Penguins have the number 11 pick. The Rangers have number 12. But the Rangers have a really interesting decision to make because they owe the Penguins a first-round pick. It's either this year or next year. They have until 48 hours before the draft to decide. And I think they'll wait right up until the 0 hour just because there's no reason not to. But it's a difficult decision, and I've been debating it on my show. Do you guys have a preference? Would you want the number 12 pick this year, or would you rather the Rangers keep it and just kind of roll the dice and see wherever you end up picking next year instead?
This one's difficult because there was an episode a couple weeks back. Hunter was on vacation. I went on a solo journey myself, and I go back and forth on this because I think realistically, before the Rangers hired Sullivan, I was advocating for go ahead and keep this year's pick, because if they would have hung on to Laviolette and just kind of run everything back, I hope they give you next year's, because I looking at the way the team was heading under Laviolette, I was like, they're probably going to be worse next year. So give us a big, nice time pick in 2026. Now with Sullivan, it kind of feels like the fire's been lit. They're probably going to be better next year. So, I mean, if I'm the Rangers, I think you probably give the Penguins the 2026 pick just because you're going to be better next year. It won't be a top 10 pick more than likely. I will say this, though, if the Rangers were to hold on to next year's and gave the Penguins this year's, if I'm Kyle Dubas, as soon as I get that information, I'm on the phone with every team in the top 10, and I'm trying to package the 2 picks together to move up in the draft to see if I can get somebody better. But realistically, I do think that at the end of the day, I think the Rangers will probably hold on to this year's and give the Penguins next year's.
I do think they will hold on to this pick and give that pick next year. And hey, it still creates a pretty intriguing situation because, say, just throwing it out there, the Rangers maybe aren't that good next year. Then you have the opportunity to have an unprotected, potentially top 15 pick if the Rangers do miss the playoffs. And if the Penguins miss the playoffs too, again, they could potentially have 2 top 15 picks next year. Like, sure, the Rangers could say, hey, we'll give you this year's pick. You'll have 2 picks in the top 12. Do what you want with that number 12 pick, and we'll keep the one next year. But as of right now, I still think the Rangers, that is, they're thinking, we want to make the playoffs next year. Let's just hold on to this one, give them our pick next year because we want it to be, in the 20s. And obviously their goal is, the early 30s because they want to win the Stanley Cup. I think that's what they're going to do. I think they're going to take the chance and hold on to their pick this year and give the 2026 first round pick to the Penguins next year. Though I will say, if the opposite happens, the Penguins have an opportunity to get 2 pretty, at least decent prospects in this year's draft. Obviously, if they want to package the number 12 pick, if they get it, they could try and go get a player that can help right now and well into the future when they start contending again. But I still could see them picking back-to-back someone like a Victor Eklund, someone like a Kayshawn Aitchison, et cetera, et cetera. Now, John, our listeners would want to know, what do you think the Rangers are going to do?
It's a tough decision for sure. And when this initially came up, I mean, obviously they make the trade, they get JT Miller, the Canucks then kick that draft pick over to the Penguins, which all of us Ranger fans were absolutely thrilled about, by the way, when they did that. But initially I thought this was a no-brainer. Give the Penguins the first round pick this year and hang on to your pick next year, because generally speaking, I think that next year's draft class is thought of a little bit higher of this year's draft class. So when you're talking about the number 12 overall pick this year, that might be the equivalent of picking, say, like 20th next season, given that it is just a deeper and more highly thought of draft class. But the more I think about it, you look at what the Rangers are doing, and they're retooling this team on the fly, for better or worse. And we can debate that strategy all we want, but that's what they're going for. They're trying to put everything back together very quickly and contend again next season. And so the more I thought about it, it's like, if you truly believe in this team, if you're the Ranger front office, you believe in all these moves they've made, you believe in all these things they've done, you think these players can round back into form, and you've got your coach now in Mike Sullivan, then why would you be afraid of the Penguins having your unprotected pick next season, right? Because if you're going to turn things around and you're going to be back in the playoffs and you're going to be contending again, then you don't have to worry about that. Because the better the Rangers do next year, the lower of a draft pick that becomes for the Penguins. By that same token, though, if things do go really south next season, then all of us Ranger fans have to deal with that, plus knowing that the Penguins have our first round draft pick, and it's going to be a really good draft pick, lottery or whatever it might be, top 5, top 3, depending on how things go there. So I'm still really torn. The safer thing to do to me is to give them the number 12 pick this year, and I think I do lean that way slightly. I thought initially, like, this is a no-brainer, give them this pick this year. I'm still slightly that way, but I'm a lot more conflicted on it than I thought I would be initially, is kind of where I'm at right now with that.
Yeah, my biggest thing from a Penguins perspective of it is I don't think there's a wrong answer for them. I think regardless of what the Rangers go with, like I said, if you get this year's, you have a potential to package it and maybe package the 11th overall as well to either move up or go get a younger player who is falling out of favor or even is a higher rated prospect. And then if you get next year's, you just got to hope that things don't go that well for the Rangers. I think they're in a good spot regardless, but realistically, I do come down on the side that you do, is that next year's draft is a lot deeper than this year's. So if you can get another pick in the 26 draft, you don't need to cry crocodile tears about it.
Yeah, I hear you. I think, like I said, the safer play and probably the better play, give it up this year and let the Penguins have their back-to-back picks. That's an interesting situation in and of itself, that you have 2 picks in a row. And interesting idea there from you too, Patrick, about potentially packaging them together and trading up to get a bona fide star player. But I figure we can call it there. I mean, this episode has really kind of flown by today, and it's always great talking hockey with you guys. And Certainly we'll do this again at some point because as we were talking about, we all have a long off season here. The playoffs are ongoing and we got a long way until our teams are playing hockey again. So we'll definitely make this happen again.
Yeah, absolutely, John. Blast as always, sitting down with you, man.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you again, John. This was great.
You got it, guys. And Ranger fans, Penguin fans, thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you guys next time.